Remember, you asked for this video. This is all about perfect PressFit installation. We're going to go through sizing and installation compounds and dimensions and all that sort of thing. So stick around, you're going to learn quite a lot. It might get a bit heavy, but get down in the comments. I'll try and answer things as they come up. Right, I want to start with Shimano. This must be the most popular PressFit bottom bracket on the market. BB86, you get 105 Ultegra, Dura A spec, etc. And it's one of my favorite if your frame is the correct size. But how do you know? Well, Shimano actually tackle this differently to all other brands. You see, in their frame fit specifications, and I'll try and put links to these documents down below, Shimano say they guarantee this bottom bracket to be 41.00 millimeters and 41.07 millimeters exactly. And they leave it up to the frame manufacturer to interpret what size the frame should be to get a good press fit installation. Remember, press fit is actually an engineering term to indicate that you've got some sort of interference between two things. So you've got some grip. A slip fit would come in and out dead easy. An interference fit would be too tight. A press fit gives optimization of a fit where you've got a good grip, but it still allows free rotation of the bearing. So if you imagine, if you really squeeze this in as compressed, you would restrict that bearing being moved. And if it's too loose, this whole thing would slip in the frame rather than the bearing rotating. So that's what we're trying to achieve. Now, when you're installing these sort of bottom brackets, I always recommend going to the actual instructions and not necessarily going to a YouTube video. And if you get to the Shimano instructions, it clearly shows you install these completely naked, no grease, no retaining compound at all. Your frame is the correct size to achieve a press fit. This goes in completely naked. You see, the plastic material here has got enough compliance to take up a little bit of slack. But also, if you install this with a retaining compound, you could be causing problems further down the line. And also, if you install it using assembly compound or grease, or even that white lithium grease, you'll notice that the white lithium grease especially will kind of swell and make the situation worse. And a lot of greases can eat into this sort of plastic polymer. I'm not quite sure what the material is. And any mechanic will tell you that sometimes when you're trying to remove these, the plastic turns really brittle and they come apart in bits. And that's actually the grease kind of eating away at this material. So this on a carbon frame definitely goes into completely raw. Next up, we have SRAM. Now SRAM have obviously GXP and Dub, and actually the SRAM frame fit specifications are one, really easy to find, but also really, really extensive. And SRAM do this from two directions. One, they give you the exact dimensions of all their bottom brackets, and for BB86 they say that this needs to be a nominal measurement of 41 millimeters, but on their frame fit specification, so this is where they're asking the frame manufacturer that if they intend to fit a SRAM bottom bracket, their frame should be at these dimensions. It's got in here 41 plus 00, so 41 dead, minus 0.05, so 40.95 to 41.00 is what they expect the frame tolerance to be, and that goes across the entire width of this as well. When you look at the SRAM instructions, they actually recommend that you can install this with a grease, so maybe they're using a different compound, and my experience of using these is that they don't tend to become brittle in the same way as the Shimano ones do. I'm not a plastics engineer, I'm not entirely sure the reason why. I tend to follow instructions, and when I don't, I recognise the problems that it causes when you don't. So there we go, that is for SRAM. Now Campagnolo, I don't actually have a press fit one here, but Campagnolo, as always, go to the absolute nth degree on this. So if you download the Campagnolo instructions, you will find some of the best technical drawings for bottom brackets out there. And Campagnolo get even more specific on their frame fit, and they are definitely telling the frame manufacturers exactly what size the frame should be if they want to fit a Campagnolo bottom bracket to their frame. And on here, they have 41 minus 0.03 and minus 0.06. So they're saying the maximum bore is essentially 40.97, and the minimum bore would be therefore a 40.94. So really, really specific sizes. Campagnolo, because they use an aluminium cup, also get very specific on the type of retaining compound to use. And they recommend using these two activators, either a 7649 or a 7471, and two different types of, when I say Loctite, Loctite is the generic term, but Loctite is actually the brand name, and then you have what they call retaining compounds. These aren't Loctites that you might see on a thread locker. Come on to that in a second. These are specific bearing retaining compounds designed to fill a very microscopic gap. And they recommend using 603, 609 or 638. And this all depends on whether you want a bigger gap fill or a faster or slower curing time. Those are the three big ones who give absolutely fantastic instructions. After that, not all of the brands are so good at giving such explicit instructions. So for example, Rotor really don't give you any indication of what you should be using, but you do get clues. So for instance, you can see on these rotors that you've got a little groove here and the fact it's made out of aluminium. So we sort of refer back to the Campagnolo instructions and know that if we're using these type of compounds on this, it kind of must be safe because Campagnolo are recognizing it. And also this channel gives us some reassurance that it's been designed for using a retaining compound because you've got a channel there that's going to take up some excess and help with that gap fill. Remember, these are activators. It is an anaerobic curing process, so this speeds that up when you're not using metal on metal surfaces. So anyone who lurks for Loctite or reads the technical documentations for these will say these are designed for metal, not metal on carbon. So that's where these come in, and the actual curing that you want depending on the gap that you need to fill. Okay, hopefully you're still with me that it's not as clear cut as that. Essentially, very, very few brands actually tell you to use grease. And if they do, they normally ask you to use some sort of assembly grease, which is there for an anti-corrosion layer more than it is for a lubricant. So for sometimes you might see brands ask you to use a copper slip or a nickel fit on titanium frames, or you might just see something that's a completely inner assembly grease like this Maxima one that we've got here. If you don't have any of that, in all honesty, using a good quality grease is okay. We use Mobil XHP 222, and to be honest, this will work in most situations that you need to use grease. It's very rare that you need to use grease on a PressFit application. One more thing very quickly before we move on to sizing. We also occasionally use Loctite SI 595. This is actually a silicone sealant for when you have a really big gap to fill, and some Praxis bottom brackets tell you to use this. So with all of that in mind, how do you now decide whether you need to use these when you shouldn't do? So assuming that your frame is okay, it's going to be the correct size, you can follow the manufacturer's instructions and get a good bottom bracket fit. However, if you've been watching this show, Hambini shows and everything else, you probably know that's not always the case, and we need to do either some engineering to make it a perfect fit, or we need to add some chemicals to make it as perfect as a fit as we possibly can. So the easiest way to do this is with a simple go, no-go gauge, and this is simply a piece of aluminium that we know has been cut to the minimum diameter and the maximum diameter, and we literally offer this up to the frame to see if it's a go or a no-go for the fit. Easy peasy. In fact, we've actually even developed our own ones for BB86 so that we can put this in both sides and then actually use a shaft in the middle as well to help check the alignment either side. So a few ways you can do that. That's assuming that you've kind of got a round hole, and sometimes when you offer this up, you'll see like light shining through it, indicating that you've got more of an egg-shaped hole, or maybe you've got inconsistencies. And that's where we like to use an internal micrometer like this. And this means that we can measure at certain points around the bottom bracket and get a good understanding of what sort of shape it is. Now, we've seen this used on the channel before. I'll try and link those videos down in the description. And this is a really good tool to get a good idea of how egg-shaped your bottom bracket might be. Now, assuming that your bottom bracket is actually round, you can then use something like this. This is the bore micrometer, and this is going to give you a better indication of the overall, and you can see it's got 3 prongs here. Now, you can use this in a couple of ways. You can use it straight up like this, so you can just rotate it through 45 degrees and take another measurement and get a better idea of how round your hole is. But this is generally better for measuring holes that you think are actually round, and you just need to get a better idea of the tolerance in the fits. So it's not a tool that most bike shops have. Then finally, occasionally we might use the bore gauge as well. Now, car mechanics will recognize this for measuring the internal bore of cylinders, and this really helps us measure the bore across the entire width of the bottom bracket. So it might be a perfect 46mm here, but there might be a taper as we go in towards the center of the frame. So this will help us pick out any of those inconsistencies as well. Now, like anything, any engineer, craftsman will say, measure twice, cut once, because I always like to get a really good picture, really good understanding of what it is that we're working with before I then look towards correcting problems. Now, one of the easiest ways of correcting problems is to use something like this. This is a cutter, and this is one from Park Tool, and you'll see here we've got the 40.95 cutter on here for BB86 and the facing tool at the same time, and this is going to literally cut away at the carbon. Now, we've also got these in BB30 size 41.94 and PF30 size 45.94 as well. So we can cut a perfectly round hole for all of those three key sizes for PressFit. The reason I say we've got to measure, because really you only want to be cutting the smallest slither of material. These really don't work if you've got to be cutting more than 3 or 4 microns or so. Anything more than that, and I'll probably want to grind out some material first before I start taking a cutting blade to it, and which is where this tool really comes into its own. This is a very simple cylinder honing tool, really used for scoring the inside of cylinder heads, but it's got a very light abrasive, and you can see it's got a spring that keeps this under tension. So you can attach this to a drill and actually help bore out that. And then when you're more confident with the fit, you can go back in and try and make that circle completely round. Once you know you're only skimming off the last little imperfections to get round to your perfect circle. And sometimes you just do it by hand. Sometimes it's a case of using this tool to measure exactly, work out where the high spots are, and going in there actually by hand and hand sanding things down. Once we've done all that, we can then use engineer's blue. We can use things like feeler gauges like these to help get an idea what the gaps are, and then keep working that hole until we're happy with the bore size and the contricity as well. Okay, that's all for other videos. Subscribe to the channel if you're keen to know more about how we use this tool. We have used them on videos in the past. You guys are always asking. We might do some videos in the future, a bit more detail. In all honesty, it's not the sort of thing that you're probably going to do at home. One, because these tools are super expensive and you probably want a professional with some liability insurance to tackle that job for you. Okay, the final part of this is, so what happens if you have an oversized bottom bracket? If the hole is too big and you go to push this in, and rather than getting that friction fit, you get something that's just loose and sloppy and just falls out again. That is where you have to use some kind of retaining compound. So that is not retaining compound, this is Loctite for thread locker. Retaining compound is a completely different product like this. Now, this is where I really recommend you got to try and measure things, work out the extent of your problem, what size gap have you got to fill. Get onto the website of either Loctite, Vibratite or Delta. There's lots and lots of different brands of bearing compound out there, and find one that will work with the gap that you have to fill, and then read all the instructions, make sure that you have the right sort of activator depending on the materials that you're trying to bond, and then make sure you give it a really good cure time, and also make sure all those surfaces are completely clean. And if that fails, well, there's always silicone sealant. Okay, I think I'm done. I hope that video was somewhat helpful. Like I say, subscribe to the channel, and case by case we'll show you how you use this as we get real case studies into the workshop. So a really good incentive to get subscribed and be notified when those videos go live up on the channel. As always, get those comments down below. Well done for making it this far through the video. Honestly, applaud you. I'll see you on the next one.